Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is from the incredible mind of Subaruligan, from over on Reddit, No Sleep. And as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled. Since people seem to enjoy my last creepy tale from Appalachia, I'll start writing the rest down when I've still got breath in my lungs. When we were kids, my older brother and I used to play army out in our woods, deep in the hollows and on the ridge tops of southern Appalachia. In western North Carolina, we built all kinds of foxholes, forts, walls, trails and everything in between. You name it and our imagination could frame it out and build it up. And we never felt uncomfortable, never felt watched or any kind of uneasy. Until one late fall weekend, when the leaves were still starting to let go, but still crunched beneath your feet just before the snow came. We had marched a mile or so back through the old logging trails, grown up so thick that you could scarcely get a grown man through some spots. We found a perfect spot to start for the next fort. It was flat and no trees and about 50 feet wide, and the same long. Plenty of leaves covering it, and a good raking of them up into piles at the clearing's edge would make an impenetrable wall for our imaginary attacks. We set to work with only our feet and hands, as we hadn't grabbed our father's tools that day to clear the leaves from the clearing. We set about piling them up as best we could around the edges, and we decided that we need a foxhole to hide in, directly in the centre of the clearing. As we redistributed more and more leaves, we discovered 9 large and oddly smooth rocks that formed a neat circle in the centre of the clearing. We didn't pay much attention to the discovery at the time, and diligently worked at our task at hand. It started to get late, and we could hear our mother whistling loudly through the autumn forest for us to come home. We relented and decided to grab a rake, mattock and a shovel for the next time we went out, so as to build our impregnable fortress the best way possible. As we walked home, the forest came alive with all manner of nocturnal creatures. Coyotes yipped and barked, bob whites cooed, owls screeched and hooted. It was relaxing and the air was warm, but only just on our faces. My brother and I laid out plans for the next day to build the ultimate fortress. We went as far as to draw up a rudimentary blueprint, complete with the large rocks that occupied our newfound fortress site. As we looked closer at the blueprints, we realized that the rocks formed a circle. Perfect. It will be even easier to fence it in and dig the foxhole in the centre. We ate our dinner, not speaking a word of our plan to our parents, and took an early leave for bed. We awoke early in the morning, before our parents, and went to grab all of Dad's tools we would need for the day. The air was much cooler this morning than the last, and slightly breezy, with an overcast sky keeping the warmth of the sun out. We donned our coats and hunted orange beanies so as to be safe in the woods during hunting season, per our parents' request, and set off. As we walked, my brother and I both noted the eerie silence, but chalked up to the cool, windy weather. The only wildlife we observed were a few ravens that seemed to observe us as we walked, never flying away as we approached, but rather watching us from all the tall trees. And as we trekked our way back to the mile or so back into the wilderness, we talked excitedly about the fort we were going to build. We alluded as to how our older cousins would be jealous and want to come check it out. And as we came upon the site, I noticed an eerie feeling of uneasiness, like we were trespassing or someone or something didn't want us to be there. I thought nothing of it, and we set about raking up the leaves into walls. After an hour or so, all of the leaves had been raked out of the clearing and into the edges, forming a neatly stacked little border walls. And all the while, my uneasy feeling of some sort of transgression never ebbed. My brother took notice and asked me, teasingly, "What's wrong with you? You afraid of the woods, you little girl?" And I laughed but replied, "It feels weird out here, like we're not supposed to be here." He called me some names and told me that he would protect me from anything out in the woods that came to get me. In true older brother fashion. This didn't put my uneasiness at rest, but I lied and told him that it made me feel better by saying that. The time had come to start on our foxhole in the centre of the clearing, within the rock circle. We started with the mattock breaking up the ground and pulverizing the tiny rocks as we broke through the long, undisturbed surface of the red clay that is common throughout southern Appalachia. The deeper we gouged into the earth, the worse my feeling of uneasiness grew, until it was pure dread. I had been shoveling out the dirt as my brother broke it up, and I stopped. He sank the mattock into the earth a few more times, and as he looked at me seemingly to ask why I had stopped, he brought the tool down one more time with a resounding clunk. He had struck something. Now, before either of us could exchange questions, I forgot my feeling of dread and began shoveling again, feverishly this time to see what we had hit. Maybe it was treasure. Maybe it was a meteorite of something cool. As I brought the dirt out of the hole and onto the surface, it became very clear what he had struck. Stained red by decades of subterranean existence in this ferrous clay was a human skull, with a large chunk taken out of it by the mattock. We stopped in absolute horror. All excitement and happiness drained from our demeanour. I, being 8 years old, screamed and began to cry. It felt like we had killed this person ourselves. It felt like we had stashed the body here and prayed not to get caught. My stomach churned and I vomited my breakfast onto the clearing floor. And as we reeled from the revelation, the very atmosphere around us seemed to grow cold and unfriendly, like we had disturbed something unnatural. We stood in silence for what seemed like an eternity, and as the wind shifted the tree branches around us, I heard what I thought was our mother whistling for us to come home. My brother heard it as well. We both lit off for the house, not wanting to spend any more time in the presence of whatever we had exhumed. As we walked back through the woods, at a much quicker pace than we had entered them, mind you, the claustrophobic trail seemed to get even more tight, and in places they even became unfamiliar. It was like the forest itself was trying to keep us from getting back to the safety of our home. We finally burst through the trailhead, tools in hand, just as a bolt of lightning split the sky, arcing off in all directions like nature itself had become infuriated with our actions. We walked inside after putting the tools away, just as the downpour had started, and I called for our mother through the house, but no answer came. We walked around towards the carport and saw that Dad's car was gone. And that was before the golden age of cell phones. My father was provided a company phone and he always kept it on him, so he picked up the landline and called him. Mum picked up the phone, much to my great relief. And they had stepped out to get pizza and a movie for a flick video because they didn't feel like cooking. For a few brief hours, we forgot about the terrors of the day, for the most part. There was still a gnawing, biting feeling in my stomach as we sat and watched the movie Mum and Dad had rented. And as it grew nearer to bedtime, the feeling of dread returning grown stronger all the time. And I could not sleep. I tossed and turned for hours until eventually found a comfortable enough position to drift off. I began to dream that I was once again on the trail to the clearing, only this time the sun was not out, but the orangish yellow glow of the harvest moon lit the entire path like a giant lantern in the sky. There were no stars, only the moonlight emanated from the blackness of the night sky, and as I walked, my feet made no sound, even when stepping upon the dried-out twigs and leaves. This had to be a dream, yet it felt so real and lucid. I walked so much as if my body was controlled by someone else down the path to the clearing, and as I drew nearer and nearer to the site, where we had unearthed a strange unmarked and yet marked grave, I began to notice a pale glow coming forth from the clearing. Upon approaching the area, I noticed something that I won't soon forget, though it's been 20 years since I'd seen it. The origin of the pale glow was a hunched-over, wrinkled and gaunt woman. Her jet-black hair hung in a very thin wisps off of her head. Her lips seemed to have dried up and decayed off of her thin and leathery face a long time ago. She was stark naked and covered in foxfire, the glowing fungi that is found throughout Appalachia. And she was sobbing and moaning softly as I kept my distance. And I inched closer to see if I could figure out what she was hunched over, and as I did, a twig snapped under my foot. Time stood still, My heart raced and my skin began to sweat in the split second that it took for the sound wave to reach this ghastly-looking woman. Her gaze immediately snapped in my direction, with unnatural speed and all the wrong movements for any human of this plane of existence. Her piercing eyes were further apart than a human being should be, and devoid of pupils. Her nose was bulbous and hung off of her face like a diseased zucchini squash. Whatever the hell this was, it was no longer a person, if it ever had been. Her eyes immediately locked with mine, and I knew I was caught. She screamed an evil shriek, shrill and terrible. I immediately wheeled around and began to run, but to no avail. I only gained about 4 steps before I felt it grabbing a mighty pull on my left ankle, mid-air, and my face met the earth with a hard smack. When I regained consciousness a few minutes later, I was being dragged across the forest floor towards the clearing by this woman-like monstrosity that stood a full head and shoulders above any man. I was too dazed and confused to scream. I could only watch on in horror as this thing dragged me across the forest floor towards the centre of the stone circle. And perched upon the 9 stones were the very ravens which my brother and I had seen in the daytime. Their beady eyes focused on mine, cawing and cackling as I was thrown into the circle of stone. I looked up into the face of the thing that had dragged me to where I laid, and as I did so, she burst forth with the most shrill and evil cackling I had ever heard. It filled the airways and resonated within the very earth upon which I laid. Her gnarled and cavity-riddled teeth jutted haphazardly within her overly large mouth at different angles and of varying degrees in sharpness. Her black, diseased tongue licked what remained of her putrid lips as she cast her gaze downward to my helpless body. The ravens began to caw in rhythm as she reached out towards me with long fingers that terminated in sharp, dagger-like nails that were more akin to claws than fingernails. The cawing quickened as she made contact with my chest. I felt a nail sink into my skin as I screamed out in pain, still unable to move. The cawing grew louder and faster, drowning out my screams, and just as she began to grip my chest to rip further into my body, light split the sky, so bright that for a moment all I could see was white, and the woman screeched a blood-curdling shriek, and then the light was gone. When my vision returned, the woman was gone, the ravens were gone, and the grave was covered over, and there stood my brother, in the midst of a frigid downpour, with a shovel in hand. Not a word was exchanged, but we both knew what we had just witnessed. He pulled me up off the ground, and we headed for the trail towards the house. The rain slacked and stopped as soon as we were out of sight of the clearing, and the stars came out. The moon was just coming up. Its pale, soft white glow led our hike back through the hills and hollers. And we walked into the basement instead of the main entrance, so as not to wake our parents. We shed our rain-soaked clothes, and as I took my shirt off, I noticed 5 deep punches that had scabbed over. My brother dressed the wounds as we both exchanged glances, and I slept in his bed that night, even though we were past the age of it being acceptable to do so. We never told our parents of that event. We never spoke of it again. I did some research, and years later I discovered the story of an older woman who had been accused of 9 counts of witchery in the 1700s in the fort where my hometown lies. And as such, she was burned in the square where the old fort was located. To this day, on autumn nights from the safety of our parents' back porch, you can still hear an old woman cackling on the cool autumn breezes and the scream of a dying young child, led astray by the most evil thing I had ever encountered. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. What a chest-pounding and rather creepy short story there. And from the incredible mind of Subaruligan from over on Reddit, No Sleep. Big thank you, Subaruligan, for your incredible input. Really did enjoy this story very much. And of course, I hope you enjoyed my rendition. And look forward to more of your work in the future. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. Well, it really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. Now, if you're an aspiring writer or would just like to get in touch with me, please do so at the contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. As ever, guys, I hope you're all well and happy, had a fantastic week at work or school, or perhaps you're a long distance driver. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're enjoying it and giving it your all. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.